What's good, mini crafters? My name is Samuel and I paint minis, build dioramas, and do other cool hobby projects. In this week's video, we're going to be digging in to a common fantasy location. I'm going to be sharing some nuggets of information on each of the steps on how I did this project. And I know you're not going to want to take this video for granted. If you haven't caught on already, we're going to be making a Dwarven mine entrance up in the mountains for this week's video, and I hope that you enjoy it. Now let's dig in. Okay, enough puns. Before jumping into this week's video, I wanted to take a quick moment to let you know that I've decided to split this video into two. And this isn't to increase the number of videos that I put out or to section it off, but about 3/4 of the way through this project, I realized I was missing a component that I needed to complete the project. That being said, I ordered it. I'll get into the details about why I don't have it and why I had to split this video, but I figured that I would do a little more quality over quantity and not try to rush out a video for you guys, but instead give you the full effect. Now, I know some viewers love multi-part videos and they enjoy the series structure YouTube videos. I know other viewers can't stand it, so hopefully you can extend me some grace here. I didn't do this on purpose, but if you would like to see more videos done in the sectioned multi-part series, let me know. If you prefer them in one go, let me know. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed, the viewers, the commenters, everybody. I couldn't and wouldn't do this without you, so I appreciate the continued support. But enough of the monologuing. You came for a badass video, and that's what you're gonna get. One of my favorite fantasy locations in D&D or movies is Dwarven settlements, or mines, or underground cities. I remember the first time that I saw Lord of the Rings and when the Fellowship got to the mines of Moria, that just was super exciting to me. The idea of what, riches were underneath, how deep and dark the caverns went, and to see the ingenuity of the dwarves was just something that always captured my fascination. There are tons of different types of Dwarven mine entrances, and a quick Google search brought up a ton of inspirational videos and pictures for me. Some are elaborate with large Dwarven runes cut into rock. Other are simple, huge openings or doors into the mountains. Some can be easily stumbled upon by adventurers, while others are more cut off and hidden. The question that I was asking was, what kind of Dwarven entrance do I want to make for my mine? I like the idea of creating a Dwarven mine entrance that is clearly cut into the mountain but surrounded by organic rock. I think dwarves have a really good way of balancing how they impact the environment they're in. They may have huge sprawling cities and foundries and forges underground, but you may have no idea that the mountain's inhabited by dwarves. With that in mind, I'm going to start by figuring out my initial shape. I don't need the whole mountain to work with, rather I want this to be almost a sliver of a scene. Now normally, I would opt for denser XPS foam, which is easier to carve, cut, and shape without making a huge mess. But I think this pellet style foam is actually going to work perfectly for the base structure. Then from there, I can use the denser XPS foam to add stonework, etchings, and other details. Another reason that I'm drawn to this piece of foam is that I want to try to create a bridge section spanning a chasm below. I'm thinking that if I slice off the back part of this larger section, I can simply glue it to the other side, and that would create a space between the two for me to put a bridge in place. Once I have the initial styrofoam blocks cut and in place, I can begin to work on the details. I wanted to start with the entrance itself and sort of work my way out from there. The entrance itself is going to be an ornate opening into the mountain rather than a magical door or a hidden passageway. I also know that I want to have some rocky outcroppings around the entrance to really help create the idea that the dwarves carved this entrance right into the side of the mountain. And with the white styrofoam cut and glued in place, I'm going to switch over to the green XPS foam that I normally work with. This is going to allow me to create the details on top of the white styrofoam. As I was trying to figure out how I wanted the entrance to look, I recalled that dwarves use well-measured 90-degree cuts and intricate details in their designs. Keeping that in mind, I used my hot wire foam cutter to make 3 layers out of XPS foam. I made these thin and went super slow and carefully. Now when you're working with a hot wire foam cutter or anything similar to that, you want to make sure that you're working in a well-ventilated space and away from your face. You can't see it, but I actually have a little miniature desk fan that's blowing the fumes and the smoke from the styrofoam away from my face as I work. With these thin layers, I can work in steps and show how the dwarves worked their way in through the layers of the mountainside. For now, I'm just creating the general shapes without adding details. And here, I'm cutting out the openings in each layer, starting bigger and working my way down to a smaller opening. Later on, I'm going to come back through with my hobby knife, hot wire foam cutter, and other tools to etch in the detailed stonework. Continuing to work on the right side, I figured I would start with the nicely cut stonework where the mine entrance will be. Remember how I said that the pellet style foam doesn't really cut or etch well? It really doesn't. To remedy this, I'm going to be creating some sort of thin layer of XPS foam like I did for the entrance layers. These will be much easier for me to carve and etch stones into. I glued down the top layers that I would have leading into the mouth of the mine. I was about to glue down the chasm wall, which is also a thin layer, when I realized that I would have a lot of trouble accessing that area to etch in the stonework. At that weird angle, it would either look sloppy or slanted, or I'd get too frustrated trying to get my knife and tools in there. So, prior to gluing in the chasm wall, I decided I would need to etch in the stones first. I have a really nifty process for etching and creating realistic stone and brick walls. I walk through this process step by step in another video of mine where I show you tips, tricks, and help guide you into making your own brick or stone wall. The exact same techniques work for this, and I'll have that video linked in the top right corner of the screen for you to check out after. To break it down quickly, I've taken a pencil and drawn out the individual stone shapes. Then from there, I take my hobby knife and I make shallow cuts along the lines that I've drawn. Then, I take a few dental tools and putty tools to create a bit of space between each stone and to round out the edges. And then as a final step, I take a rolled up ball of tinfoil and I roll that across the wall to create a realistic texture and divots in the wall. I may also go back through with my knife to create cracks, break off edges of stones, anything like that to give it a last touch. Now that the chasm wall is detailed out, I can glue it in place. Painting everything will come later. Something that I've noticed when working on projects is knowing when to do what. And I don't just mean following steps in a specific order. When you're working on different projects, it's important to be thinking ahead a few steps, trying to navigate and know what needs to happen in order for you to do X, Y, Z. Sometimes you may think through a process and realize that you need to reorder the steps that you're working through. That's totally fine. You just saw me realize that I needed to etch the stone into the foam wall before gluing it to the project. Now, I could have gone ahead and just glued the facade, that thin piece of foam, to the side of the chasm, and I would have been totally fine. It just would have taken me a lot longer to get in there, carefully etch the stone in, make sure it looked the way I wanted. So by reordering which steps I did in which order, I was able to, one, speed the process along, and two, save myself a headache. After getting the chasm wall glued in place, I want to add the detail to the layered entrance itself. This process is going to be exactly the same as I did for the chasm wall, except I'm going to be using a larger variety of stone shapes instead of similarly shaped square stones. I start by penciling in my design, then I go through with my hobby knife to create cuts. Then I'm going to use my metal tools to create some more separation between each block. As a finishing touch, I take the tip of my metal shaper tool and add some etches, cracks, and lines to a handful of stones to create an extra layer of texture. I also used a balled up piece of tinfoil and rolled that across the whole surface. This sort of mashes the foam down a bit while adding a quite convincing rock surface texture. I repeat the same process for the other layers as well. To really drill down on this foam etching technique, yeah? See what I did there, saying drill, because it's a mine? Okay. Anyways, I'm going to be doing the last series of penciling, carving, and etching, this time on the bridge that's going to be crossing the chasm. Something different with this is that I wanted the bridge to have a more cobblestone look with rounder stones making up the walkway. This part actually took the longest since it's easier to etch straight lines like I did with the wall and the entrance layers. As I work my way across the bridge, I'm using an up and down slicing motion to allow me to move around the curves of each stone. This isn't something that you can really rush. Rather, you just need to take your time and ensure that you hit each stone enough. This is because the next step, I'm going to be taking a pencil, you could take a metal tool, something to create the space between each stone. And if you didn't get your knife around each of the stones to make the cut, then when you come at it with a pencil or some other tool, you're not going to be pushing the stones apart. Rather, you're risking tearing the foam, which can certainly mess up the look that you're going for, especially after you've just spent all this time creating the shapes that you want on your bridge. Once I have the bridge etched, I'm going to focus my attention on the edges and ends where the bridge will meet the two sides of the chasm. Dwarves often incorporate runes and etchings into their work, so I figured I would try my hand at some simple etching to create a similar look. First, I cut out some rectangles with an angled corner to act as a brace for the bridge to allow enough space for some detail. First, I'm going to cut out some rectangles with an angled corner to act as a brace for the bridge, which will sit at all of the ends. And this is going to allow me enough space to add in some etched detail. Before just gluing the bridge in place without checking, I was sure to dry fit the bridge and ended up gluing the end stones in place to hold it. This accomplished two things. First, it let me get the end stones right up against the chasm wall for a nice fit. And second, it let me see how much distance there was from one end stone to another. And this is important because I wanted to fill that empty space between the end stones with some more detail. I cut a long piece of foam and added similar maze-like squares all along it. I then fitted this between the end stones and hot glued it in place. This was a simple design that added a bit of depth and support to the bridge, both physically and visually. I did consider adding an additional design piece, but it was a last-minute thought and I couldn't really get it to look how I liked, so I ended up scrapping the idea. Now, something that I did to help soften the edges of these to make the stone look more worn was to take a toothpick and roll it over the sharp edges and corners of the foam. This is a minor effect that really shows up when you compare it to a non-rolled foam edge. Now that the bridge is done, I'm going to prep the mine entrance for adding the green layered foam. Before doing that, I want to cut out a hole for the mine itself. Doing this before I add the detailed layered mine entrance will leave me some room for error if I mess up. If I did it after adding the detailed entrance, I risk damaging that with this next step. I start by taking my short attachment and outlining the door hole on my hot wire foam cutter. I quickly realized that this was going to take too long, so I resorted to good old-fashioned brute force and a pair of pliers. But after about 30 seconds of that, I decided that I would use the long attachment for my hot wire tool, and I would use that to cut all the way through the thick foam. Please notice and appreciate how my camera decided to focus on my hand for this entire shot. In the fuzzy background, you can see that I went all the way around the door slowly and eventually popped the unneeded foam out. Now that you watched me struggle and use 3 different techniques to try to cut a hole in this foam, you get to see me get to the big kahuna tuna moment where I'm going to glue the layers of the foam together that makes up the mine entrance itself. This is an important step because not only am I gluing the foam together and making sure that the piece itself, that they're all lined up, I'm also going to be making sure that it sits correctly against the structure itself and the scene itself, and that there's no space at the bottom where the foam is going to meet. First, I'm going to be gluing the layers together one by one and ensuring that they are even and flush on the sides. Then, from there, I'm going to be adding hot glue to the back. And as you can see here, I didn't cut the foam as carefully as I could have, and there's a sizable space between the layered entrance foam and the stone ground, even when I had it positioned correctly. At least I thought correctly.
Mission failed. We'll get them next time.
As you know, mistakes do happen. Sometimes too late to go back and change them. I can't try to rip the foam entrance off, otherwise I risk destroying everything that I just put together. But that's okay, I'm going to roll with it, and I think I'm going to be able to fix this later on when I come back in with modeling paste. I'll be able to fill in the cracks and divots that I didn't measure up right. After getting the mine entrance in place and the bridge dry fitted, it was time to shred these walls to pieces and make them look like rocky mountain surroundings. Now, I've seen and used a ton of different techniques when making foam look like rock, and it usually involves going at it with a hobby knife or even your hands to tear and shred the surface up. My key takeaway for you here is that this process takes time. You are not going to like how things are looking right away, and you're going to feel like, oh my gosh, I've just wasted all this great XPS foam after not getting the look that you want. But I would say keep at it. I call this style of rock sharp organic because it's super general looking, and as far as rocky surfaces go, it's more sharp and angled. To get this effect, I start by making long horizontal cuts across the foam, being careful to watch my fingers. After I get a ton of those cuts, I'm going to do the same thing again, but I'm going to come at the foam at an angle, cutting in diagonally to where I've already cut. I may also switch to the other side and come at it from that angle as well. After a number of passes, you're going to start to notice that slivers of the foam are falling away or getting pulled out. At this point, you can come in with your hand, hobby knife, or something else and start to pull all those loose foam slivers out. I started to use my thumbs in a rubbing motion, and that actually helped to dislodge any foam slivers. Also, don't be afraid to crack off edges of the foam to get unique shapes. Just don't forget to come back in to the broken off area with your hobby knife to create that rock texture that we're working on. I do this same rock texturing technique all over the side walls where I want the mountainside to be emulated. I work in sections, often checking and seeing how far down on the foam I need to texture. I don't need to go from the very top to the very bottom, as about half of the foam is going to be glued to the main scene and hidden. Once I have the walls themselves textured, the scene's really starting to look more realistic and starting to come together. But something that I noticed, and that you may have noticed, is that the corners of the scene are super perpendicular. And I don't know if you've seen mountains, but they don't normally come at straight 90-degree angles. So what we need to do is fill that in with some more foam and texture that up as well. To build up the volume and gradually slope the mountainsides, I'm going to be doing the same rock texturing that I did for the walls, but on smaller pieces of foam. And as I start to get the shapes that I want, I'm dry fitting them into the corners, shaving off pieces here, and adding other bits there. The last stonework that I'm going to need to add is over the mine entrance itself. As it looks now, the entrance seemingly springs out of the ground at the edge of the bridge. But what I want is for the entrance to look embedded in the mountainside. With some stone blocks added to the left of the entrance, I'm covered there, but I'm going to need to add some more up top. And to do this, I'm making more rock textured foam blocks and cutting a little shelf into the backside so that it hangs over the edge of the top part of the mine entrance. All in all, I ended up needing to make 4 different blocks that were going to be hanging over the mine entrance. I'm going to be using my trusty hot glue gun to get these in place over the entrance of the mine, and from there, all of the foam work is done. Now, it's time to go and add some ground texture to the ground areas. And because your boy ain't splashing cash at the moment, I'm going to be making this paste myself and showing you how to do it too. For this delicious forbidden dirt pudding, you're going to be needing a few ingredients. Here you can see dirt, fine ballast, plaster, matte Mod Podge, and water. First, you're going to mix all of the dry ingredients together. I'm using an old Tupperware container that I stole from my kitchen. Mix up all the dry ingredients until they're well incorporated. Also, if you want to get this just right, make sure you get too excited, move the spoon, and catch it on the bottom of the container that you're mixing this in, and then flick the mixture all over your desk. Super important. Once it's thoroughly mixed, add some matte Mod Podge and water in. And you know this recipe came from an old college roommate who never measured anything because similarly, I don't have any exact ratios to share with you. Rather, I'm going to be eyeballing it, and I'm going for this type of consistency. It's chunky, yet spreadable. If it's too dry, add some more water in a little bit at a time, but please don't eat the batter. I'm taking a couple of spoonfuls of this paste and I'm dropping it into the spots of my scene that I know I need ground texture, such as the area leading to the bridge as well as the riverbed below. I am using an old chip brush to spread the paste around, and as soon as you spread the frosting, you're going to want to come back in with some powdered sugar, also known as fine dirt, and you're going to sprinkle that all over the still wet paste. Not only does this add more texture to the ground, but it can help soak in any excess liquid that is seeping up from the paste. I'm also going to be coming in with some larger stones and ballast to add some more texture and different sized natural debris. The brown stones that you see me settling down in there are little pumice stones. And the other stones are terrarium fill rocks, which have a nice variety of sizes and shapes. I'm sprinkling these in sparsely around the lower area, and I'm also adding them to the base of the mountain rocks on the left side of the scene. This is going to help to blend the ground into the scene and make it so it doesn't look like the mountains are simply sitting on top of the ground. Now, remember how I totally didn't glue the layered mine entrance down correctly and left those awesome gaps? Nah, me either. But to rectify this, I'm going to be taking some of this earth paste that I mixed up and I'm going to carefully push that into the cracks that I've left. I also take some of it and work it around the corners and all along the base of the entrance that meets the ground. And while that paste is still wet, I'm going to add some fine and medium ballast to better join the mine entrance with the area around it. I also took the earth paste and I put that down inside the mouth of the mine as well. The last step, after getting all the rocks, ballast, and texture down, is to lock everything in place. I'm going to be using both dropper bottles and spray bottles for these next steps. Step 1 is to come in with some isopropyl alcohol to saturate the ballast in the earth paste. This is going to break all of the surface tension up for step 2, which is to come in with some scenic glue. For the paste around the mine entrance and at the base of the mountain rock, I'm going to be using the dropper bottle to help with accuracy, so I'm not getting glue everywhere that I don't need it. For everything else, I'm going to be coming in and using this small, fine mist spray bottle to get even coverage of the glue. Now, to let everything dry.
Later.
And here we are. Everything is dry, it's locked down, and it's hard to the touch. Now, I just need to seal up the foam mountainside. We made some forbidden dirt pudding earlier, and now we're going to make some forbidden melted ice cream. I'm taking plaster, Mod Podge matte, and some Payne's Gray acrylic paint, and I'm mixing all of that up. I don't have the ratios for this either, but I'm going to be going for a slightly thinned consistency, but not watery. Somewhere around the consistency of, well, melted ice cream. I'm going to be using an old chip brush to start applying it to all of the textured rock. As much as I was joking about the melted ice cream consistency, I want this to be thinner so it's easier to get it into all the nooks and crannies. This is important because this paste is not only acting as a base coat for my paint later on, but it's actually sealing the foam so that none of the green shows through, and so nothing can get into the foam and cause any issues later on. I'm working in sections and applying the paste all over. Don't add too much at one time, otherwise you risk obstructing all of the detail that you spent so long etching into the foam. And if you get us to a spot where the paint is pooling, make sure that you just take your brush and simply spread it out. I often use a stippling motion to get things spread out and into all the deep recesses. Don't forget the tops of the mountains either, and when you get close to the base, you can switch to a smaller brush to allow for better control and placement of the paint paste. Hot dang, this is looking good. With just the base coat down, the cracks, crevices, and textures are really popping here. I just need to let the paint paste dry before I come back in with my other paint colors. In the meantime, I can work on painting the bridge, the mine entrance, and the ground texture. Now for the painting, I actually just got this cheap Master's Touch acrylic paint from my local Hobby Lobby. I like using this stuff instead of my fine detail mini painting paints. One, because the mini painting paints come in teeny little bottles, and two, I don't need anything fancy when I'm just going for maximum coverage and base coats. I'm going to be starting by painting the mine entrance area on the right side of the scene, and I'm just aiming to get a base coat down. The thing that can be tough to balance with this step is that we need to cover the bright green foam color while also ensuring that the paint isn't too thick in each layer. That way it can seep into all of the nooks and crannies. So I'm going to be watering down my paint mixture, which will mean that I'm going to then need to apply multiple layers to get full opacity. As for the paints that I'm using, I'm working with a white, black, and Payne's Gray to get a cool bluish color that I want. Now, as the stonework and mine entrance are drying, I'm going to be working on painting the ground texture area to the left of the bridge, as well as the chasm below. As for the paint colors, I'm going to be breaking out the burnt umber, burnt sienna, as well as a bit of yellow ochre. I'm mixing everything up and adding in a splash of water to thin it, then applying the paint to the earth textured areas. Something that I do differently when applying on this section is rather than using a wiping motion, like I did for the flat stonework, I'm going to be using a jabbing and stippling motion to get the paint where I want it to go. And while the brown ground color is still wet, I'm going to be coming in with some of that yellow ochre and blend some of that into the brown. This is going to lighten the color up a bit, and it's also going to simulate some warm sunlight hitting the ground. In the same way that I added the yellow to the earth texture, I'm going to be adding a bit of green to the stonework to emulate moss and life. It gives a cool, damp feel to the stones. I do thin this paint down quite a bit with water as I'm just looking to create an undertone paint layer. Lastly, I'm going to be adding paint to the water area under the bridge, and this is where I have a ton of fun creating depth and interest. On the higher areas, like on the left side of the scene, I'm using more of that mossy green mixed in with the Payne's Gray. This is going to be a shallower area, and I want to reflect it as such. For the deeper central area, I'm going to be using plain layers of Payne's Gray to shift it to a darker color. This transition is going to help show the depth of the water. And later on, when the base coats are dry, I'm going to come back in with a fine brush to hit some of the stones with a lighter gray to make them pop a bit better. With those steps finished up, I'm going to be moving on to adding washes to the mountainside to break up the flat, boring gray color and add some color interest. I'll be using 4 main colors to start, and as I work, they're going to end up bleeding into each other to perfectly blend and create some new colors. First, I'm making 4 cups of diluted burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and black. Then, I'm going to be using my old chip brush, and I'm going to start going to town on these mountainsides. I'm ranging all throughout my wash colors and randomly adding them all over the place. I do focus the darker colors lower and the yellow ochre towards the top to help with depth and show where the sunlight would be hitting. Once that's all down, I let it dry a little bit, then come back in with the black wash over everything to unify all of the colors. From this point, I need to let the wash dry. because next comes dry brushing with a lighter gray color to catch all of those edges and details. One of the last steps that I wanted to do here after getting all the painting done was to add a few spots of fine green turf to the scene. I used normal PVA glue and an old brush to create patches of the glue around on the ground, along cracks in the stone, and on a few of the mountainside areas as well. Then I just sprinkle the fine turf over the glue and let it dry. This adds some life to the scene, fills in some of the cracks and edges on the foam, and I think it gives it a nice finishing touch as well. And at this point, everything is done. We just have one last teeny tiny, hugely intimidating thing to do, and that's the water. So in the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I was going to have to break it into two parts because I was missing a key component in order to complete the project. I don't own, nor have I ever used, a deep pour epoxy resin. I've always stuck with my tried and true still water by AK Interactive, which normally works perfectly for what I'm doing, which is small puddles, little areas of water, things like that. The only issue with the AK Interactive still water is that you have to work in really thin layers, like 3 millimeters height max per layer. And if you don't, or you try to pour more than that, or you don't let the last layer fully cure, you risk ruining your project or the resin not curing correctly. So I did some quick maths, realized that I had about 20 millimeters of depth that I needed to fill with resin, which I could do with the still water, but I'd have to work in 3 millimeter increments, and that would take seven sessions of pouring, each one taking 24 hours to fully cure before I was able to move on to the next one. And I didn't want to wait that long. From there, I decided I would have to go with the deep pour epoxy resin. The only issue is I ordered it and it's still not here. So I decided to split the video into two parts. The first part being everything we just did, creating the foam, creating the structure with the foam, getting the textures down, getting the paint on, everything but the water. The second part of the video, I decided I was going to add the epoxy, the resin pour. I was going to create a waterfall, and I was going to show you how to do the ripples on top of it after all was said and done. But until we get to the waterworks, I'm going to call it a wrap on this one for now, you guys. I really hope that you liked this video. We got so much done on this project. We shaped the foam, we built the entrance, we added ground texture, we added the foundations of a water feature, and we painted everything up. Now, we could call this baddie done, but I'm just itching to get the resin added and pull it all together. I really can't wait to continue this project and finish it out, and you're not gonna have to wait long because this time next week, I'm gonna have the second part of this video out where I'm gonna get the resin poured, the waterfalls created and added, and the ripples added as well. Let me know what you guys thought of the video below in the comments. If you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. It really helps get this video and my content in front of other viewers like you. If you have any questions or thoughts or ideas on this project or what I should do moving forward, drop a comment below. And until next time, keep on crafting.